Pretty simple chemistry there.
What would you mix the hydrogen peroxide?
I use it straight.
Straight?
Use it straight out of the bottle. What you're getting at the drugstore or the grocery store is pretty dilute anyway. You can put that directly on your skin. Now, on your skin, you can buy concentrated hydrogen peroxide, but it is nasty stuff. They use it to shock wells and things like that to get bacteria out of that, and that's much more concentrated. But all you need is the stuff you get for 50 cents a bottle at HEB. Yes?
My neighbor's easily confused, and last time
She's good.
last time I told her, don't stir your compost tea because it disturbs the growth of the fungus. But now I'm just telling her,
Don't stir your compost pile because it disturbs the growth of the fungi. The fungi that are in here have not propagated and gone everywhere. They are in a very small form. And again, that's the reason that we don't want this to look like the North Atlantic in winter. We don't want that water, doing this. That would be enough to damage the fungi. But just kind of a rolling boil, that's not enough to bother them. So, great question. Don't stir the compost pile, but the oxygen is stirring your compost tea. Yes?
In my rain barrel, I noticed like an orange film building up on the edge of the water. Is that what you refer to as
That's not really a biofilm. That is probably a red algae of some sort growing. Now, if you started dumping molasses or something in your rain barrel that was stimulating the bacteria in the water, then you could get a biofilm built up. But you're not going to have biofilms on just undiluted rainwater or things like that. You're going to get some interesting algae. And if you put that algae under a microscope, you can get some interesting little creatures living in that algae. But none of them are bad guys.
Okay, thank you.
Yes?
Okay, now, we let this go for 8 hours with the stone aerators in there. But now, when did you say we take out the
Take
bag?
the compost out after about 8 hours. Take the bag out after about 8 hours. But we leave the aerators in there the whole time.
Oh,
Don't
okay.
ever take the oxygen away. You want the oxygen going the whole time, but you're going to pull this bag of compost out
After about
after about 8 hours. Don't throw it away. I mean, don't make more compost tea with it, but go dump it on your garden somewhere. It's still good
Okay,
stuff.
so then we leave the aerators in there for the
18 hours.
The 18
Up to
hours.
48 hours. Up until you use the compost tea. Leave the aerators in there.
Okay, great.
That's additional 18 hours?
Or total. It's just, again, we're not exact. Again, if you make it one morning, use it the next day. If you make it one afternoon, use it the second day. Yes?
Can you explain why the foaming would be bad?
You make a mess.
Okay.
Yeah. There's nothing bad about it except that it literally, it might look like Mount Vesuvius with foam coming out of the top of it. There's nothing bad with it. It's just messy.
Children would
That's the
love
only
it.
thing. Yeah, kids would love it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, these compost tea, does that help with your early blight on tomatoes?
It almost certainly does.
Because you don't have to use hot wash that, huh?
Try them both. Again, what works in your garden might not work in mine. What works in my garden might not work in yours. Gardening, if you haven't learned it by now, is not an exact science. And what works for her might not work for you, might not work for me. And that's why it's important that you keep notes. And that's also important why you don't listen too carefully to the experts that tell you how to do something. I know in my college days, working in an electron microscopy lab, the scanning electron microscopes especially were brand new. And I would go into the director of our lab and I'd say, Vanita, I did such and such, is that right? And she would say, well, did it work? And I said, yes. And she said, well, then that's right. That's not how I would have done it, but the way you did it worked, and therefore, that's the right way to do it. The three of us came up with a rotary coating technique that's still the standard of the electron microscopy world, now 40 years later. We did it by experimenting. But if something works in your garden, don't let anybody tell you that that's the wrong thing to do. But if you're not being successful with something, by the same token, don't let anybody tell you that you're doing it right. Obviously, in your environment, your growing condition, it's not working. So look for something different to do, because everybody's garden is a different microclimate and everybody's successes are going to be different. Just keep up with what you do, so when you have a really successful crop, you'll know how to go back and repeat it and get the same results again. Yes?
Back to cleaning the bucket, do you use straight peroxide or do you dilute it with some water?
What I do is scrub the bucket and then rinse with straight peroxide.
And how about putting it through the The bubblers.
The bubblers, I'm just gonna drop them down into a little cup of hydrogen peroxide,
Straight peroxide.
straight peroxide. Yes, sir.
So if you took your painter's bag and emptied it out and put it in the peroxide, that would sanitize the bag?
That would, but again, I'm really not as concerned about biofilms on the painter's bag because it's only been in there 8 hours and then it's dried out completely. I'm not worried about biofilms the second time you make compost tea in this bucket. After you've been making it in the same bucket for 6 or 8 or 10 times, then it gets a whole lot more important to clean it. Yes, ma'am.
As far as rain barrels, if you leave water in there, don't use it for a while, does it get stale or
It can get stale, so to speak. It can get mosquito larvae in it. It can lose some of the magic of rainwater because some of it's going to, disappear out of the water. The nitrogen that's in there is probably going to turn back to gas and go away. But is it bad? No, it doesn't ever go bad.
how long?
But
is
it-
it long?
That's impossible to say. My friend John Kite up in Bernie, and we may get him to come down and do a rainwater harvest deal sometime. John's got 30,000 gallons of rainwater storage. He doesn't have a well. He's lived on rainwater alone for, 12, 14 years, something. He has the cleanest, clearest water, the clearest ice you've ever seen. He just has a UV filter he uses on his rainwater. By the way, if anybody's interested in rainwater collection, he does workshops about once a month at the Civil Nature Center up there. If you're really interested in rainwater harvest, I believe it's next weekend up in Kerrville. There is it's an all-day program Friday with lectures that you'll pay to go to, all-day display on Saturday. Go to TXRHS, I think it's the Texas Rainwater Harvest Society or organization, something like that. And you'll see all about the rainwater harvest seminar next weekend. Jason.
I also have them on the video from the roundup last year.
Okay. Up at the Renewable Energy Roundup in Fredericksburg, he gave a program. You have that on video, and people will find it on YouTube at?
YouTube.com/Organic Texas. One word, Texas is spelled out.
Okay. Find all sorts of good things there. You can see John's presentation. The good thing about going and actually taking one of his courses at the Civil Nature Center is they're not held at the Civil Nature Center. You meet there, and then he takes you to his home and shows you, exactly what the system looks like and how it works. Best $25 you'll spend if you're interested in rainwater harvest. Okay, that's most of what I have to tell you about compost tea. From here on, we'll be question-driven. And feel free as you go out to, lift the lid, look down in the big bubbler over there. I will tell you, we make compost tea every weekend. I have, in effect, empowered you to make your own compost tea if you want. If you don't, we make it by the gallon and sell it Saturdays and Sundays here. I think it's $5.75 or something. Doesn't cost that much to make, but that machine was almost $2,000, and the catalyst and things we put in there, we're going to recoup that cost, a gallon at a time. But, and like I said, we have it pretty much all day, every Saturday and Sunday, until we run out. Certain times of the year, we run out of by the middle of the day Saturday. Most of the time, we have a little bit at least left on Sunday morning. Yes, sir.
I'm in Black Clay, east of the interstate in San Marcos. I've been doing my own compost tea for a couple of years, and it's still refractory to just about anything. That stuff is nasty. Now, should I emphasize the bacteria or the fungi?
What I would do is put a bunch of bacterial stimulants in your soil, molasses, dry molasses or regular molasses. We're not worried about it going anaerobic in the soil. So I would work on putting things in the soil that are going to stimulate the microbes. I would add the microbes in the form of your compost tea, but I would be putting like dry molasses or liquid in the soil and some compost if you can to speed up the softening of the soil, so to speak.
And then kill it at that point?
You don't need to. The microbes actually change the soil structure into what we call a crumb structure that opens it up and loosens it. You don't really gain anything by tilling.
Okay.
In fact, it's counterproductive in some ways because it brings organic material up to the surface, then oxidizes and goes away. I will stay here and answer questions, but if anybody has got to go, you're not going to offend me by getting up and going. Next week's seminar is on roses. Yes, ma'am.